Please pray with me. May the words of my mouth and the meditation of our hearts be acceptable to you, O Lord, our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. I want to start off our time together today telling you a story about Mother Teresa. Before she died, there was a television special that depicted the grim human conditions that were a part of her daily life. It showed the horror in the slums of Calcutta and her love for these destitute people. The producer interviewed her as she made her rounds in that place. Throughout the program, though, there were commercials, of course, that interrupted the flow of the discussion. Here's what it looked like. Mother Teresa was talking about lepers, and then there was a commercial for some bikinis on sale. Mass starvation was one segment, followed by an advertisement for designer jeans. Next, they went on to talk about agonizing poverty, but the commercial break next talked about fur coats. They got to abandoned babies and the problems that existed, and the commercials tried to sell ice cream sundaes. There were dying people, followed by a commercial for diamond watches. Our reading for today has all kinds of opposites in it. And the contrast between Lazarus and the rich man is just as stark as what happened with Mother Teresa's interview and the commercials. You see, there was a rich man and a poor man. One man is named and one man isn't named in our story. One gets to feast daily while the other one starves. One wears fine linen while the other is covered in sores. The rich man, of course, has so much, and Lazarus has so little. The rich man's purple garments would signify affluence, an outward visible sign of his wealth and privilege. But just as visible is the plight of Lazarus. The Greek word for sores is the same as boils. Think of those boils from the 6th plague that came to Pharaoh. And one wonders about the contrast between the fine purple clothing of the rich man and the oozing purple sores of Lazarus' body. The rich man has a pantry that overflows. He's able to feast daily. But Lazarus, he would just be grateful to get a few table scraps, to get the leftovers. With all of these opposites, it's helpful to remember that some people in biblical times, but even some people today, think that people with wealth are favored by God. And those who are poor, they're poor because they don't have God's favor. It's as though those who are good get rewarded with this material wealth, and those who are bad are judged by God, so they deserve to have just the tiny bit that they have. Well, if this were the case, then Lazarus would be seen as an evil man because he was poor. And likewise, the rich man would be seen as rich because he is good. But in this parable, things get turned upside down when they die, because Lazarus gets to go to heaven while the rich man goes to Hades. So this old understanding that the wealth shows God's favor and people who don't have much are not in God's favor, it doesn't hold up with this parable. In this parable, we get to see who God is and we get to see who we are. Here we encounter the teaching of Jesus that calls us to examine ourselves in the opposites. And when I start to think about this parable and I start to think where I fall in this parable, I identify with the rich man. And since Jesus is teaching how wealth can create walls of separation or a great chasm, it's good to get a handle on where we stand. One of the ways that I do this, and you can do it at any time, is just to Google the global rich list. In order to do this for us, I took what is the average income for here in Sioux Falls. The average income is $29,926. If you make that much, the average in our community, that means that you are the top 1.24% richest person in the world. That means if you make that much, you are the top 2%. Jesus told this parable so that he could break down the barriers that wealth can create. And Reverend Dr. Lundbad put it this way. The good news is Jesus didn't tell this parable to scare the hell out of us. Jesus told this parable to change the way that we are living on this side of heaven. You see, we are feasting sumptuously, and Lazarus is still hungry. And of course, there isn't only one man named Lazarus. There are millions of men, women, and children who long for a crumb that falls from our tables. Many of them are beyond our front gate, beyond our front door. We will never even know their names. And yet, every 3.6 seconds, someone dies of starvation. I most likely won't see them, and most of you won't either. But there is a great chasm between us and the millions of people who are starving. I know this is overwhelming. I am overwhelmed when I think about this. I'm overwhelmed when I hear these numbers. I begin to feel guilty. And I suspect some of you might too. But as we dig into this, we need to know that our guilt is not going to feed anyone. And Jesus doesn't tell us exactly how to cross this great chasm between rich and poor, but he surely thought that it shouldn't be there. We're left to ask, what could change the rich man? Or more importantly, what will change us? Asking what God does desire for me and my relationships to others is exactly what this parable is getting at. That great chasm doesn't have to exist. In the middle of our backward priorities and the chasms that we create, it's there that Jesus comes. Jesus invites us into relationship with others, and it's in community where we see the needs of others, we see the resources that are there. And when we encounter Jesus, we begin to see these things in a different light. We are changed to be able to see our neighbor and to respond with the love that has first been given to us. And Jesus invites us to rewrite this parable with the way we choose to live our lives. The good news is this rewriting is happening. I saw a glimpse of it Monday night at none other than Hy-Vee on 49th Street. You see, Monday after work, I was getting ready to head home, and I needed a few things because I'm one of those kind of people. So you run through and you grab those few things that you need, and you have so few that you get to go through the express line. And that express line is one of those that has a cashier, and then right next to you there's another cashier helping somebody else, so you're super close to the other people buying food. So the person beside me gets their order through, and then the cashier asks, "Would you like to donate money to help feed people in our community?" The lady said, "Not today." The cashier said, "That's okay. Not everybody is in a position to help. Thank you for shopping and have a nice day." And then my stuff had been rung up, and I get the question, "Would you like to donate to hungry people today?" And then there was this little thing, you may have seen it, that you could give a donation and they could scan it for $5 or $10, and it just put it on your order, so with a swipe of the credit card, you were able to give money. I said, sure, I'll give $5. I mean, I had just given $5 for one of those little cups that has grapes and cheese all together. And then I heard the question pop over again, because the person next to me was finishing up their order. Sir, would you like to give money to help feed hungry people today? And then I heard the cashier thanking that man, saying, thank you for going over and above the suggested donation. That is really generous of you, sir. And the customer replied back, thanks, but I've been there before. It's good to be able to help. And as I walked out of Hy-Vee Monday night, I couldn't help but think of Lazarus and the rich man. The opportunity to bridge the chasm to the Lazarus-type folks in our community was given. And to add some complexity to it, there was a man who had been on both sides. At one point, needing the help when he was hungry, but on Monday night, he was able to give. Robert McClellan writes that this parable is an incredibly gracious story, for it is a manifestation of God yet again reaching out to God's people, whether rich or poor. God comes to each of us and all of us with what we need. Comfort and strength to endure, or a prophetic example by which to be corrected. But in neither case are we left alone to fend for ourselves, because God stands to meet us at the gate, offering to bridge the gap that threatens to separate us from one another and from God. Like I told the kids earlier, the number one thing about God is that God is always there loving us. And we are invited to in turn share God's love with others, with our brothers and sisters, wherever we find ourselves. This is the good news. Amen.